Greetings and welcome to the Happy Recap podcast for this August 23rd, week of, and 2020 is the year, of course. How could you possibly have forgotten, quite frankly? Yeah, certainly that's what we're looking at right now. We're glad to have you along with us in the middle of a break in action caused by the COVID-19 test positive the other day with the New York Mets. And we'll certainly look a little deeper in that. Our guest today is Justin Toscano from The Record, NorthJersey.com. And we'll be talking about that in depth, look at a little bit at the midway point of the season and check in on the latest with the owners and the sale of the team. EJ, I tell you, one of the things I noticed this morning as I was getting ready for the show is that today is the birthday of Kobe Bryant, which is about as far from Mets news and information as you could possibly get. Especially as I am a longtime Laker hater, but it kind of occurred to me, and I don't mean this at all flippantly, that Kobe Bryant's death is probably the moment we should have realized, okay, let's just cash in our chips on 2020. Holy cow.
For real, yeah. His was the first of the celebrity deaths that actually I felt affected me. Him and I are the exact same age, graduated high school the exact same year, obviously. Our career paths went on a different trajectory, but yeah, it was pretty eye-opening this morning to open up Twitter and see a lot of really cool tributes to him. But yeah, that was the precursor to God, is 2020 awful.
Yeah, pretty much. And it certainly hasn't gotten better in a lot of directions. And all the best to those in the South that look like they're going to get 2 hurricanes in the same week. It's just one of those things where, I beg 2021 to come as quickly as possible. But we've got some baseball to play before then. Not quite sure when that will be for the Mets. Will it be tomorrow, Monday, with a doubleheader? Sounds unlikely at this point, but we'll ask Justin Toscano about that. And hopefully, though, we'll see a return to action on Tuesday should these test results continue to stay negative. One would imagine that the clearance for Major League Baseball to play will be pretty close behind it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's been all good news thus far. It sounds like those 2 cases are isolated. Everybody who tested on Thursday and Friday, all their tests have come back as negative, which is great to hear. I guess we're just waiting on some tests from yesterday, and I'm assuming another round of testing for today before we get the green light to go ahead and play baseball. But I'll tell you, man, it really highlighted to me, not having Mets baseball the past couple of days, how much I have really depended upon having Mets baseball back in my life for getting me through this pandemic, for getting me through this quarantine, because not having it has really left a bigger void than I would have felt in many, many years previously had we had just a typical all-star break.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been the same for me. I mean, the first thing I did as soon as it settled in the news and that you hear that everybody is basically well, obviously, which is always your biggest concern. But the first thought was, what am I going to watch tonight? And we're still in the summer. They ain't nothing on. And there won't be for a long time because they haven't been able to make any fall shows anyway. But it's one of those things where early on in the pandemic, early on in the lockdowns, a lot of us turned to South Korea for the KBO, and then Major League Baseball came back. And I got to be honest, in watching some KBO games the past day or two, they're really good. Don't get me wrong, and nothing against the KBO, but they ain't my Mets.
Yeah,
and I feel that more now.
It's not the same when you don't have that rooting interest there. I tried to watch some nationally televised MLB games, and while it's cool to see MLB caliber games playing, it's not the team that you have the rooting interest in. It's just hard to really get into it right now. I tried to watch some NHL playoffs, and again, I'm a Devils fan. They weren't even invited into the bubble, so that was a little difficult to get into. So it's not the same. I need my Mets back, man. I need my Mets.
Yeah, I mean, I've got an NBA team in the playoffs, but their last 2 games are not worth speaking of during this blackout period. I just rather deny they existed. So, there is that. And as Forrest Gump used to say, that's all I have to say about that.
Right, right. Yeah, it's just getting into these other leagues right now is just it's difficult. Like I really literally I'm an NBA fan and I haven't watched a second of NBA thus far, aside from a Laker game that I checked out in the first week of this. Like I saw the NBA acknowledged a coach of the year the other day. And I'm just like, how the hell do you have a coach of the year when your entire season was about 3 weeks long? So I just it's tough to get into any of it. And I like I said, I just want the Mets back. They were playing so well, and I think that's what's the real heartbreaker is that they're as well as they were playing. They just won 3 straight games, and it looked like they were ready to poised to turn this thing around. And to now shut down, it's like now you're getting the itchy finger. You want to click the remote, turn on SNY, have Gary, Keith, and Ron be on, and all will be well with the world.
Yeah, you want to see what's going to happen next with the clothesline for one. What will Keith send to Gary next? But it's you mentioned that the others the sports and my NBA team is in the playoffs. It had to play in, but they made it in. And yeah, for those who don't realize regionally, I live in Oregon, so I'm a Trailblazer guy, which is as much of a curse in the NBA as being a Mets fan. Let's be honest. The reality of it is the minute the Blazers check out, which they seem to already have, the minute they check out, I'm done with NBA for the year. I have no interest in staying in the bubble. For that exact reason you talk about. Once you lose a rooting interest, these modified games just have no interest to me. But the Mets, that's another story. That's an entirely another story. It's bad when the best entertainment that you've been able to get baseball-wise while your team is sitting in quarantine, basically, is a foul ball hitting a giant stuffed bear.
Yeah, which we've all seen posted multiple times on social media. That is,
and thankfully, it's still funny. It's still funny.
Yeah.
It's still funny
it's
right
hilarious.
now.
It's
Ask me
hilarious.
again in October, and I'll probably like, oh, not
Right.
that again.
Right.
But it's we're at this weird midway point, and it was occurring to me earlier that it feels like we talk about the 2020, and obviously the news story that our kids will be learning about and our kids will be learning about when they talk about 2020 is COVID-19, and certainly it should be of course all the other things going on too, but I don't think murder hornets make it into the playbook just yet. But the thing I was thinking of as it relates to Major League Baseball, and this is not to be flippant towards COVID-19 at all, but it feels like to me the legacy, and I wanted your take on this, is going to be the injuries. And the fact that so many of these injuries, Strasburg just went on the shelf for the Nats. Now, listen, I hate the Nats. I can't stand Steven Strasburg. I hate the Braves. I can't stand Mike Soroka. But do I recognize they are brilliant pitchers and the game is better with them than without them? Oh, yeah. And it is sucking to see these guys go down. And some of them, like Soroka, is going to be well into the 2021 season. And who knows? It's an Achilles. You just don't know. I mean, some of these guys are going to be hurt into next season, recovering into next season, or may never be the same again. And to me, that's going to be the legacy of the 2021 season.
Yeah, I mean, summer camp was great and all, but there's a reason spring training lasts 7 weeks. It's for these guys to get themselves back into playing condition, and obviously they didn't have that. And like you said, Soroka could be a career-altering injury. And with Strasburg, I was sitting there saying from early on, what the hell's taking him so long? Opt the hell out, man. He was clearly having issues from his early starts when he got scratched against the Mets, when he got yanked early against the Mets. I was sitting there as a Steven Strasburg hater saying, please, for the love of God, will you just opt out of this season already, Steven? Because as much as I hate you because of what you do to the Mets, I love that you're a Major League Baseball participant, and I want to see you for many more years be so. It's basically like a Tom Glavine, a Greg Maddux. You hate to see these guys facing your team, but for the love of the game, you want to see them playing. And Strasburg, I was shocked how long he tried to wait it out and see if he could be healthy, because clearly it was just not going to be this year.
It's one of those things you and I have talked many times over the years on the podcast and off the podcast about being more old school baseball fans. And I could tell you right now, my favorite thing in the world, baseball wise, is a great pitcher's duel. And I still talk about the best one I ever went to was game 5 of the NLCS, Mets and Astros at Shea Stadium. Nolan Ryan against Dwight Gooden. and
Doesn't get better.
both of them went 9. In fact,
Yep.
I believe Doc went 10. In fact, and the reality of it is that that's still to me one of the best pitched ball games I've ever seen. So give me DeGrom and Strasburg every day of the week. I don't care if it's a 1-0 game. Obviously it'd be nice to get Jake some runs, but when Jake's on the mound, we're usually facing an ace anyway. But the reality of it is those are the games I love the best, just as a baseball fan, because Tom Seaver wrote a book towards the end of his career called The Art of Pitching. It is art. It is absolutely art, and that's why it's like one of my favorite accounts to follow that's not Mets related on Twitter is the Pitching Ninja. Oh my gosh, some of the stuff and it's nice to see the Mets highlighted pretty often on it. But if you've not followed the Pitching Ninja on Twitter, I mean, he highlights some of the best of pitching and the video behind it, and just blows your mind sometimes with some of the stuff that is going on in pitching, because it's not as well highlighted as it should be. But that's a big concern of mine as a fan of pitching specifically. I am very worried about 2020. Less so about the offensive side. That seems to be coming around. It doesn't seem to be causing as many injuries. Certainly, there are a lot of quads and hammies and stuff, and typical stuff that you'd see in the spring. Nothing catastrophic per se that jumps to mind immediately. But I mean, there are a couple, but none jump to mind at the moment. Certainly not with the Mets. But for my standpoint, that to me is the big worry I have about 2020. And yeah, for the love of God, whatever it takes, if we need to put them in styrofoam peanuts or wrap them in bubble wrap or put them in a giant bubble suit, I mean, I don't care. Protect Jacob deGrom at all costs, because he's one of, if not the best pitcher in baseball. I'd like to think that he is currently, but he's certainly in the top 2 or 3, and you don't want anything to happen to those guys. They are the future of the sport and the face of it.
Well, yeah, he's the best. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He's the best.
Yeah. I'm not going to argue with you.
So, I mean, it's been disturbing that Jake has had some issues this year, but all of them of the non-catastrophic variety. So you would hope that at this point in the season, you would hope that he's stretched out enough, almost like he's had a full spring training, that he would not be susceptible to what's come and plagued some of these other guys. You would hope so, but you never know. So, I mean, obviously we're going to see him at some point making back-to-back starts, which is going to be pretty cool. And that's going to be one for the weird Howie Rose type record books. That's something that we'll dwell on for years to come. But you would hope that Jake is stretched out now enough that we don't have to worry about any potential catastrophic injuries popping up.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier today, we had an opportunity to talk with our good friend Justin Toscano from The Record and NorthJersey.com. And let's go ahead and take a look at that interview, and we're going to discuss some of those things. Justin Toscano is joining us again this week on the Happy Recap podcast, and we're excited to have him with him. Of course, NorthJersey.com, The Record, Mets beat reporter. We are at conceivably the midway point of the season, Justin, but of course, can't be all smooth. We have what started on Thursday with the COVID crisis, if you will, on the Mets. Talk a little bit about how this story came about. I mean, we know how it came about, but I mean, from the media standpoint.
Yeah. So obviously the Mets were going for a 4th straight win in Miami. It looked pretty good there. And then you get, you start seeing things, and then you eventually you see the release about them having 2 COVID positives, 2 members of the organization. And immediately, MLB postponed the game. And then not long after that, postponed Friday's game. So then you're kind of thinking, you're like, man, in my head at least, you wonder if it's only the 2 or if further testing is going to reveal extra positives, because that's really the key here, right? It's because like the Reds had 1 player test positive and they missed 4 days. So you're kind of thinking about that timeline, like, okay, Mets next series against the Marlins starts Tuesday. That might be feasible if these guys are the only 2 positives. But you have the Cardinals and the Marlins, the numbers keep climbing. So then you're kind of anxiously awaiting the next set of test results. So the travel party flew back Thursday night and was tested immediately kind of upon their arrival. at Citi Field, and then was tested again in the morning. Those deemed kind of to be in close contact with the two positives stayed in Miami, and they're still in Miami, or so I've heard. And they were tested, kind of been getting tested. All those came back negative. So from a coverage media standpoint, it's hard to speculate on these sorts of things, but at least the early returns seem positive. Now, with the incubation period, things like that, they're still going to be tested daily and still need to be in self-isolation, and the team said they will still be in self-isolation. So that's important because they're not completely in the clear yet. But the initial rounds of testing seem to indicate that maybe the Mets, at least hopefully, have avoided more, of the outbreak, the spread of this, and which is good because now, they've isolated everybody from the two positives, from the close contacts. So from a media standpoint, I mean, it comes about very quickly. And it's something as I guess like a beat reporter, in the back of my head, I knew something like this was going to happen. Not that I ever like wished for it to happen or hoped it would be the Mets, but it's like in your head, you just see so many of these schedules. Like the Yankees haven't had any regular season positives, but their schedule has now been affected like 3 different times because of other teams. And it's like, you just wonder, as the Cardinals and the Marlins and the Reds and everybody else were affected by this, the Mets kind of just kept on playing. Like they had actually had a smooth, first 24 games and their schedule was unaffected. But you kind of know in the back of your head in a season like this that something like this could happen, and then finally it did.
Yeah, I think we kind of all assumed that it would happen eventually. I think we were enjoying that smooth sailing that we were having, but I think you kind of have to stick your head in the sand if you don't think that it's going to affect your team at some point. But you as a reporter, I mean, they've kept you guys pretty socially distant, keeping you up in the press box and basically away from the players. But I have to imagine that even when the news comes out, that you don't kind of personally freak out a little bit that, oh, do I need to go grab a test real quick and make sure that you're in perfect health?
Yeah, I honestly, like, I don't know if this is me with my head in the sand, but I wasn't too concerned. Like I had friends who texted me like immediately, like, hey man, like stay safe. And I really appreciated that. But like you said, they've got us so socially distanced and we haven't been within, God, I don't know. I can't really measure in my head from the press box down to the field, but that's about as close as we've been to the players. Maybe seeing them walk into the ballparks or seeing them drive by on the buses, but it's like we haven't been close at all. But you do kind of wonder because the concern stems more from like, okay, the Mets, by all accounts, had been very good at the protocols and had been very strict. So you think that, okay, if 2 members can get it, anybody can get it. It's just another reminder that it's like we're fighting something that, like, oh, the reason we're still fighting this, the reason it became a pandemic is because it's so hard to stop the spread. So it makes you think about like, you can do everything you can and still maybe get it, because not everybody's you can't just stay in your house 24/7. So it's like, for me, it's like being in a hotel, being on the road, being on an Amtrak. You just kind of think like, all right, like I got to just keep my mask on. You do what you can, but it does make you think about, okay, if 2 members of the Mets got it, if they don't think, if no one breached protocol, if everybody did something right, it just makes you think like, wow, just the severity of the situation, the seriousness of the season. And like you said, you'd be stupid to think there wouldn't be any positives. MLB, for the most part, if you take out the Cardinals and the Marlins, for the most part, they've been good with the 0.05% positive rates, point like less than 1%, each time, basically, if you take out the outbreak numbers. So they've been pretty good, but yeah, they charted for this when they were planning their kind of return to play plan. I mean, they knew there would be positives. So it's just limiting the spread, but it kind of does make you concerned from the point of, it feels like some sort of inevitability with positives, right? I mean, like it's going to happen.
One of the things that I noticed, at least with this, and a lot of people have commented on, and certainly Rob Manfred is deserving of many, many criticisms, and sometimes he probably is not deserving of the criticisms that he gets. But a lot of the times with these cancellations, postponements, policies, and whatnot, it seems really almost improvised. And I don't think that was the intent, because they had to expect these things happening. But it does it seem from the inside as a slip shot, if you will, in how some of these policies are being enacted when a team has a positive?
Some of it, yes, because you don't like we're not super clear on what their protocol is if they do have a pot. Like obviously MLB gets notified, things like that happen first. But the perfect example being after that, Marlins outbreak, MLB saying, "Well, we're going to enact stricter protocols." It's like, well, these stricter protocols should have really been in there from the start, right? So it's like some of it has felt a little reactive. And that's not the Mets or anything, they're following what MLB's doing, but some of it, yeah, has felt from the inside like a little reactive, like you had to expect positives, but I mean, anybody with a brain would have to expect a positive here or there. But I just think a little bit from MLB's end has felt a little reactive. Like they didn't consider some of these situations. And it's like, how could you not have, right? Like just like the extra PP, like now, they had to wear they're wearing extra PP and these extra surgical masks and things like that happened after the last outbreak. It's like, well, like what'd you think was going to happen? It's kind of, for me, it's kind of the same thing. Like I will say the Mets have done a good job. The one area for improvement league wide is in games, because like these guys, I mean, they're still very close in the dugout. They're still like, you still see high fives, fist bumps here and there, like pats on the back. And that stuff, like, it's human nature, but that just cannot happen if you're playing, in a pandemic. Like, I think that's the one area of improvement. But in terms of what you're mentioning with Emma, it has felt a little reactive at times. Like, I know it's unprecedented. Nobody's ever had to think about this, but if you're going to play baseball during a pandemic and not bubble like the NBA is doing, like you're going to have to do it perfectly or it's going to spiral.
I personally, I'm loving the Pete Alonso mic'd up, but at the same time, all that does is kind of highlight how we aren't perfectly socially distancing when he's basically saying, "Hey, have a great season" to every guy who crosses first base. And I love Pete and I love how cordial he is to his opponents. But at the same time, I'm like, Pete, 6 feet, buddy, Pete, 6 feet.
Right? I mean, some of it, and like you could go down that rabbit hole of that thinking and be like, well, should we even be playing a season? Because it's human nature for these guys to want to be close to each other, it's hard to play socially distanced. Baseball is the one sport where you're already kind of naturally socially distanced. But in the dugouts, I mean, I saw like Manny Machado hit the walk-off grand slam the other night. And like, they basically mobbed him. Like it was not a socially distanced celebration. So it's like things like that are and then you had the one fight, Astros A's, like things like that cannot happen. But it's like, but I get conflicted. I'm like, well, this is what they're used to. It's human nature. Like it's probably hard to break all those habits. But on the other hand, it's like, if you want to play, like, what it takes. Like, yeah, you can't go out on the road like you usually can. You can't do this, can't do that. But it's like, you wanted to play so bad. So it's like, this is what it's going to take.
Well, looking at what the potential, obviously we have half a season left to go in the playoffs, but looking at a potential legacy for the 2020 season, EJ and I were talking just the other day and also talking with other fans. It feels like to me that the legacy of 2020 is going to be the injuries more than COVID itself. And that the fact is that, I mean, especially as you see, Strasburg is the latest victim. And you have a situation where a lot of these injuries are not even season-ending injuries. These are injuries that are going to go into next season, like Soroka, who could be out for 12 months. Is it, I mean, do the players and organizations see this at all? Because it certainly seems like the legacy is going to be a lot of good players hurt and maybe never the same again.
That that was my one fear, like before the season, like during summer camp was, the worst case scenarios, the Sorokas and the Strasburgs. And like you said, because of the late start, like Soroka is going to be out. I mean, if you think about, that Achilles tendon, like pitching and planning and stuff, he's going to be out at least 12 months. So it's like, that's a young guy. So I understand from the point of these guys, okay, like they probably feel like, they've got a limited amount of years to do this. Obviously, like nobody can play professional sports forever, father time always wins. But it does feel a little futile in the sense that, like, why are these guys putting their bodies out on the line in this short season? It does feel a little dangerous because it's like, yeah, you could never be the same. Mike Soroka, God, I hate to say it, but he could never be the same. And you just never know with injuries like that, because Achilles injuries have basically doomed athletes for years. But it's like, the teams and the organizations know it. It's just a matter of like getting guys rest as best as you can, some luck. Like, I think it's a lot of luck. Like the Cano injury, very unlucky. The Rosario, like quad tightness, like unlucky. But it's like the next time that stuff happens, it might not be quad tightness. Or for McNeil, it might not be a bone bruise. You know what I mean? So it's like these things, you hope they don't pile up. And I know teams and organizations are aware of it, and their athletic training staffs are doing the best they can. But in a way, it's almost like a feeling of futility, because how can anybody – there's a reason spring training is a month and a half, especially for these pitchers, the shoulder inflammation and things like that. And a lot of times shoulder inflammation is a very delicate start to something much, much more major. And you hope that doesn't happen. But I think that's going to be the legacy for sure. And I hoped it wasn't going to be. But now you're seeing – the Sorokas, the Strasburgs, like even guys with COVID, like Eduardo Rodriguez, the COVID, his heart condition, throw that in there. And it's like, the Mets have, Jacob deGrom with 3 separate things, since summer camp started. And I like Marcus Stroman's calf tear. It's kind of hard to watch, because a lot of this stuff, or you think a lot of this stuff might not happen if they got the proper time. Obviously, they were working out before summer camp, but it's not the same as being in a big league facility, ramping up. And it's sad to see, because you genuinely hope it doesn't affect careers in the long term.
Well, it's funny, as Mets fans, we've all basically wanted Jake deGrom wrapped in a bubble wrap during this time. And while he has had his own issues, none of them have been catastrophic like we've seen with the Sorokas and the other guys around the league. But what's been really interesting to watch is to see, essentially, with the exception of Steven Matz, who's been more performance-based, we've seen the entire rotation around Jake deGrom completely basically fall apart right now. And he's the guy who we look to be the streak stopper, to go in there and turn the tide, as we saw when things were going bad. And here we have Jake deGrom healthy, hopefully, and everybody else around him is now down for the count, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, it almost goes into – it's just a weird season. It's almost like, as a team, as an organization, as a manager, as a GM, like, how do you – like, a lot of the, you want to win this year, but how do you, for me, the key is like not overreacting to this year, because there's going to be, God willing, hopefully it's normal next year, but it's like, don't throw all your chips in the basket for this year. It's like, it's just a weird season. It's like, hey, but it stinks, because these guys are going to go, they're going to pitch their hardest. By the time the regular season started, they were going 100%. They weren't still ramping up. And it's like, yeah, we've seen the rotation around him just completely crumble, and injury wise. And God, you hope it doesn't happen to the Seth Lugos and the Robert Gesellmans, because now good Lord, they're getting stretched out during a regular season. And that means that the guys behind them are going to be pitching more innings, and the Familias of the world are going to be coming in the 4th and 5th inning to start. And it's like, you just hope it's not catastrophic. But it's almost like, it almost feels like you're holding your breath for something to happen, like waiting for something. And that's just like the worst feeling, because you want everybody to be healthy and safe, because these guys have kids, have wives, have, hopefully, God willing, long lives after baseball.
Looking kind of at the on the field product at this point. We're at the midway season. Obviously, as we just said, the rotation is in, I think shambles is probably a fair word for it at the moment. The Mets have been very inconsistent. Certainly, they seem to be allergic to getting runners in scoring position to cross the plate. Very inconsistent. The bullpen has been mostly good, but it's had its moments. And despite all of that, they're in ninth place out of 8 playoff spots. Where do you see this team at this point? Is it a team worth improving, even if that's possible at the deadline? And where do you see the next half of season going?
Yeah, I think this team, honestly, I think they're fine. Like I know a lot has been made of in media coverage and in general of just like the problems on this team. But if you look at the expanded playoffs, like this team like they have had the rotation's been a mess for at least 2 weeks, and they're still like within striking distance of a playoff spot. So it's like with the expanded playoffs, I think they've got enough talent, especially in the lineup, because I think I saw something yesterday where like weighted runs created plus, like the Mets lead the league. So it's like the lineup is there. The bullpen has honestly been better from where it was in the first half last year. The starting pitching, I mean, you don't know what you're going to get, but the improvement question is interesting because I think if you're a GM, it's like you want to win, especially how Brody Van Wagenen is kind of on the hot seat because of the ownership, looming ownership situation. But I'm of the mindset that this year is so weird that I'm not going to trade any prospects. It's like, what are you doing it for? Like 4 starts, maybe 3 starts. So it's like, I would go lean toward the Ariel Hirado, the guy they traded for there, or depth pieces at the alternate site before I'm trading my future away, because I'm not going to overreact to a weird season like this. But I think the Mets, I see them finishing in a playoff spot. I don't know where that'll be, but they've had so many issues over these kind of like to the midway point, and they're still in striking distance that I feel fairly confident they'll be fine and make the playoffs.
Well, given how adamant that Rojas has been that Seth Lugo will never, ever be a starting pitcher, and that he was willing to allow for it midweek this past week, I think it really does go to speak to how they're not going to be looking for sources outside of the organization.
And that's exactly right. The fact that they're going to a Seth Lugo or Robert Gesellman, I think, with plans to stretch him out, I would say the same. And I think that's why they traded for certain guys, and before, is because they wanted to stack the alternate site, knowing that it probably wasn't worth going outside the organization. Because look, especially in a year like this, if you're going to be that team willing to, wanting to improve outside of the organization, teams are going to take advantage of that. They're going to have leverage on you. And that's just they've traded so many prospects, already in this regime that I just, like, if I'm a GM, I know, winning is important. Putting the best product out there is important. But, man, I just can't see trading away some of the future, even if they're, top 20 prospects or mid-level prospect. Like, I would personally hold on to them unless the right, the perfect deal presents itself.
I mean, I think the key for me is, especially with this season being what it is, and I think there's going to be an absolute rarity of the unicorn variety, is quality players of multiple years of control, and I just don't see those as really being attainable at this trade deadline because of how many teams are in it and how many teams are just like, this isn't a typical year, so I'm not doing anything either.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, it's weird. Yeah. It's going to come down. The expanded playoffs are going to be interesting because at the 8 and 7 spots, you're probably going to have teams that have no shot to win it all. But I mean, it's going to be, it's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how they're going to play like into the the trade market, but like into free agency too. Like, I'm not sure. It's like, does Marcus Stroman make less? Does a guy? I don't know. But it's a weird season, and I'm definitely on that side of like, just don't overreact. Like, I know it's frustrating, especially if you've got a team like this one that seemingly has a window. I mean, they've got a good core, but it's like they've got a window that's somewhat closing with Marcus Stroman going and Noah Syndergaard. You don't know what you're going to get from him. And people have said that, like, the rotation's not going to be able to carry them forever. So it's like, I know it's frustrating because they felt this team could contend, but I'm definitely on the side of, like, not overreacting. Just, just do what you can this year with what you have, and then go into 2021 and go all out.
It's interesting as we're looking at the weirdness that is 2020 and the scheduling. Okay, we got to make up these games somehow. It looks like the clear apparent would be that Monday, both the Mets and the Yanks both have a day off. That it would seem like that would be the day to have one of these weird 7-inning double headers kind of play out to try to make up two at once. But Aaron Boone yesterday, when he was on his Zoom call, seemed pretty adamant that he didn't think that they were going to be playing at all on Monday. And I was just wondering if any word has come down yet that if it's even a possibility that Monday could be a reality.
No word yet, but I would say the fact that we haven't heard anything today, by now, I think if Monday were a possibility, we would have heard yesterday. But I think I was wondering the same thing. Now, the Mets, for the makeup games, the schedule works out because one to make up against Miami, who's here, this week. And then I know I'm surprised they weren't going to make it up Monday unless they don't have the clarity on whether the Mets are cleared to play. But it's like the Mets and the Yankees have mutual off days on September 3rd and 14th too. But it's like, what if you need other games made up? So Monday seemed like a good one to at least start it. But yeah, they've got a couple in September. I don't see it being tomorrow though, because at this point, I don't know. I mean, I guess they could have announced it still, but yeah, especially with Aaron Boone, he's got the inside information. So I would say that was probably, him shooting it down.
Last thing for me, as we sit here on the 23rd of August, we are 8 days away from what is known as final bid day and the ownership sweepstakes. While not the horse race that some people might portray it as, talk a little bit about what you expect to see over the next week and just kind of the scuttlebutt of what you know on the ownership front.
Yeah, sure. It seems, if you just look at it from a logical perspective, Steve Cohen's got the most money. And I think that's going to win out. You keep seeing these stories of how, like, if Steve Cohen's bidding on it, you're toast. Like, you don't want to get into a bidding war. Like, there have been reports of kind of the Harris Blitzer duo not really wanting to get into a bidding war with Cohen and A-Rod and J-Lo. I mean, they've seemingly, they've picked up momentum, at least, in media coverage. Now that could just be PR. You don't know. That could be blowing a little bit of smoke here and there. But it's, if you just look logically, I would fully expect Cohen to be the highest bidder and to eventually own the team. Now, it's like, obviously it's not a lock. We never know how these things work behind closed doors. But I mean, he's got the most money. It's not really close. He can purchase it without an ownership group, basically. Can go from there. But it's crazy that this is also happening in 2020.
It seems that if your reports are to be believed that have been coming out, that Jeff Wilpon is very averse to selling to Cohen. But like you said, he's going to have the most money to be able to bid. It sounds like if the Wilpons really do not want to sell to him, then they are going to drive that price up, which in the long run is going to be financially beneficial to them, because they're going to make him they're really going to make him pay when he already had an extra $2 billion set aside just to buy SNY. It sounds like they make him throw that into the kitty to buy the actual team.
Yeah, well, that could be true. I mean, if they drive up the price, a lot has been made of their financials lately, the Wilpons. So, I mean, this is a chance to really, like, bail them out in a sense. And if they could theoretically do that. Like I said, we don't know what happens behind closed doors, but yeah, if the reports about Cohen, willing to buy an SNY at the extra $2 million were true, I mean, that's like at least like some leverage on the Wilpons. So, they know he's got the money, they know he's willing to do it. So it's like the price could very well get driven up.
Well, and one of the things too is that you hear the talk about, well, MLB owners, some of them would prefer A-Rod and J-Lo and all this stuff, but at the end of the day, it's about the value of their team too. And if they let them take significantly less to sell to those guys, if that's how it turns out, that devalues basically every team in the league.
Yeah, exactly. You want the big market teams to sell for as much as possible, because then the Royals are going to go for more than they went for $1 billion, I think, this past winter, or around there. So eventually teams like that are going to start to be higher valued if they're saying, well, and it's not a big market, but it's like, well, look at the Mets. They went for, 2 point or however many it's going to be. But yeah, you're completely right there.
Well, Justin, man, I always appreciate the chance we have to talk either online or on the podcast. And for those who want to check you out, first of all, highly recommend it. Highly recommend the small pittance that the site requires. It is well worth the money. Tell people where they can check you out, both print and social media.
So print would be northjersey.com, and then social media, Justin, Justin, C for my middle name, and then Toscano, Toscano. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and then all that good jazz.
Well, when we hit playoff time, either we'll be in it or we won't. We'll definitely check back in with you and rehash the second half, which just sounds really weird.
Yeah.
Well, thank you much, man. We appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's always fun. Thank you.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your unofficial All-Star break.
Thanks. Yeah, I didn't wish for this one.
And again, our thanks to Justin Toscano for joining us and for definitely making my caffeine intake go up for the day. We a little behind the curtain on that due to his schedule, our time difference with me being in Oregon. We recorded that at 7 in the morning, my local time. Not usually up at that hour on a Sunday. I'll be honest. That's usually sleep in time for me. So that was the fact that I was even coherent for that interview, EJ, is kind of a minor miracle.
I mean, I struggled to get into the studio, and it's 10 o'clock my time, so I can only imagine what you were experiencing.
Well, it's interesting. Normally, this is the time of the show where we kind of talk about the week ahead. It's kind of a question mark. I mean, the reality of it is on the schedule right now as we record this show on the 23rd of August. Early in the day, with the possibility of finding out later today that there's been an outbreak or that somebody else has tested positive, which all those change the game, obviously. Hoping against that, not just for baseball purposes, obviously, but I think that we look at the schedule and go, this is a field of question marks. But as of right now, Tuesday through Thursday, 3 against the Marlins, possibly with a fourth game thrown in to make up the game that was lost on Thursday, because, whose empty seats matter more, I suppose. And then any indeterminate number against the Yankees next weekend. I think that could be anywhere from 3 to 5 games, and I don't even know how they'll do that stadium-wise necessarily, because without ticket sales, EJ, you could easily say Friday is now going to be a doubleheader at Citi. And then the doubleheader Sunday and Sunday at Yankee Stadium. So I mean, you could still give Yankee Stadium 3 games and still do 2 at Citi without the craziness of the dual ballpark thing that they've tried a couple times over the years, and quite frankly, is not really appropriate in the COVID-19 environment.
Right. Well, as Justin brought up, the Yanks have already had their season interrupted a couple times because of COVID and never once because of an outbreak to them. But I do know that earlier in the season, they played a game in Philly where they were the home team.
Yep.
But they were wearing their road grays. And that's pretty much 2020 MLB in a nutshell.
All I care about, I don't mind in this 2020, especially under the circumstances, the Mets playing a quote-unquote home game at Yankee Stadium. I have one request. Keep the P.C. Richards whistle shut up for that game. That's all I want.
Right.
Yeah. That's anything else is fine, but get rid of that whistle for those 9 innings or 7 innings or 9 innings, depending on the game. And just park it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we'll get these games in with the Marlins. I don't think we're going to have any type of makeup with the Yankees as of yet. I think that'll begin probably next weekend. But I think by the next time you and I jump into the studio to record, I think we'll be talking about a hell of a lot more than just the 5 or 6 scheduled Mets games. I think we'll be talking about a lot more games than that.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to be back on track. I have a pretty good confidence. Certainly, I got a lot of confidence out of those first 2 batches of tests being negative. And then, all heck kind of breaks loose after that, EJ. As we mentioned, we are 8 days away from the final bid deadline on the New York Mets. Mr. Cohen, Mr. Rodriguez, get your checkbooks ready. And we'll certainly, I'm sure, while I don't expect certainly anything instant, the minute there's a deal in place, obviously we'll hop on and do some quick reaction as well. I mean, that could come as before Labor Day for all we know.
Hey, from your lips, man. I just want this thing to be done with. I'd love to be on here and talking about the new owner of the New York Mets.
Yeah, it's one thing is certain. For as interesting as 2020 has been on the field and off the field for this team, this offseason is going to probably top it.
Yeah, I think the phrase bananas comes to mind because it's going to be bananas. But quite frankly, I'm hoping that we're celebrating hopefully the Mets going deep into a postseason at that point.
Absolutely. Well, EJ, any final thoughts from you as we get ready to wrap things up?
Let's just play ball, man. I miss the Mets. I need them in my pandemic. I've been quarantined for 6 months now. My kid's not going back to school. My wife's not going back to teach. She's going to be doing it virtually. I need the Mets in my life as a distraction. So come back to me, Mets.
Yeah, I mean, I just need a lock on my door for the same cause and reason. So, I mean, we're both married to teachers. We both have small children. So, and we're both in month 6 of this. Thankfully, we have a little bit more freedom out here and a lot less cases. But needless to say, it's still not. I'm not parading in the streets of Portland. That's for sure. That's for other people these days, really. But that's a whole other story.
That's a different podcast altogether.
Yes, it is. Well, I appreciate it as always, my friend. Until next week, let's go Mets.